I get paid in Bitcoin. I only hold Bitcoin as essentially the money that I hold, and I preferentially spend Bitcoin directly. To me, fiat is a medium of exchange, but Bitcoin is my money. I came to the conclusion simply holding fiat makes no sense, so I stopped doing it. I do now tend to stop and think more, is this something I actually want to buy when I know that money is going to be worth more in the future? The passion for learning got crushed out of them by this education system, and I want to reinstill that in them, and I don't think I can do that while they are at a German school. The best way to get rid of authoritarianism is to make it obsolete, make it unimportant, make it not capable, get rid of its teeth. Bitcoin does that with money. Do I think countries should have strategic Bitcoin reserves? And actually, I'm going to say no, I actually don't think they should, because I don't like countries and I want countries to disappear. I think countries are a bad idea. I think humans can organize themselves much better without having states, without having borders artificially drawn by centralized powers. I expect for this coming year, 2025, is to see a lot more merchant adoption.
You also live already on Bitcoin, and with living on Bitcoin, there's different definitions with that, like to what extent we live on Bitcoin. How do you live right now on Bitcoin? Like, what is your definition of living in Bitcoin, on Bitcoin?
Yeah, so I would never be so presumptuous as to tell other people what is and is not living on Bitcoin. So I can say what I do, and that's what I call it. But if somebody else does something different and also calls it living on Bitcoin, then that's their choice. So what I do is I get paid in Bitcoin. I only hold Bitcoin as essentially the money that I hold. And I preferentially spend Bitcoin directly wherever possible. There are some things that I'm not able to pay in Bitcoin directly, so I also have some indirect methods of using Bitcoin. One, for example, is a credit card that I can pay off using Bitcoin. So essentially I go into fiat debt and then pay off that debt using Bitcoin. Or another couple of cases are actually, I do have a bank account. It sits on zero most of the time, but I will buy fiat in order to make a transaction if that's, the only way that I can make a payment. So, paying my water bill to the local council, for example, there's no way other than a bank transfer, so that's what I'll do. So to me, fiat is a medium of exchange, but Bitcoin is my money.
So you always get ahead and sell Bitcoin if you need fiat, or you directly spend your Bitcoin. You don't do anything with borrowing against your Bitcoin or anything fancy like that?
No, so my background is largely technical, and actually I've always been somewhat skeptical of the finance space in general and somewhat disinterested in it. I think money is a useful, necessary tool for organizing our world and exchanging value. But I've never been interested in getting rich. I've never been interested in trying to optimize the way that I use money, that kind of thing. So things like borrowing against my Bitcoin to me just feels like the same kind of finance games as investing in things, and it really doesn't interest me. So, to me, it's just easier. I noticed, by the way, you said sell some Bitcoin. I never think in those terms. To me, that's buying fiat, because Bitcoin is my money. So to me, the terms buy and sell are kind of the other way around than perhaps most people.
Yeah, that's a good point. For how long are you doing that now?
So since around 2018, perhaps 2017. 2017 is when I really decided this makes sense to do. I actually kind of had a revelation at that point, because for a couple of years I've been doing spend and replace. The idea, that very common idea that you will hold some Bitcoin and you want to stimulate the Bitcoin ecosystem, so you'll spend it and then you'll buy some more Bitcoin from the fiat holdings that you have. And I thought to myself, why am I doing this? If I've got fiat and Bitcoin, then I'm planning on using that fiat to buy Bitcoin at some point in the future. Why don't I just do that immediately? Doesn't it make more sense to just not hold the fiat? And at the same time, I kind of had the revelation, all these people saying things like, you'll regret spending Bitcoin because it's going to be worth so much more 5 years from now. And I realized it's actually the exact same thing holding fiat in your bank account. If you have $1,000, euro, francs, whatever currency in your bank account, and you don't exchange it for Bitcoin, you've actually suffered the exact same opportunity cost holding that fiat that you would have suffered by spending that amount of Bitcoin on something. You've lost that potential Bitcoin in the future. So I kind of came to the conclusion simply holding fiat makes no sense, so I stopped doing it.
That makes a lot of sense. Do you live somewhere where you have to pay capital gains tax on the Bitcoin?
So right now, yes and no, but effectively no. I live in Germany, and here any asset such as Bitcoin held for over 1 year is exempt from capital gains tax, and I have enough holdings for long enough now that essentially all of the Bitcoin I have is either over a year old or will be by the time I spend it.
Because the Bitcoin that come new in the wallet is kind of in the queue, and you spend first the Bitcoin that are already older in the wallet, and therefore they are already older. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Then then it gets also easier, I guess, to make that. Would you still do it if you have, I don't know, 20, 10, 30% of capital gains tax on that?
Probably not, but maybe this is one of those cases where I'd say maybe I probably still would, but I just wouldn't tell the tax office about it. It's one of those kind of situations there, but it really depends on what the tax situation looks like and so on. It probably helps a lot now that I'm paid directly in Bitcoin. So when I started doing this, I was still paid in fiat, and I would simply exchange all of my fiat for Bitcoin, and then be living on Bitcoin as I am now. But now I can simply skip that step because I'm paid in Bitcoin directly.
It's super interesting. I never thought about paying things in Bitcoin this year, but it occurred to me that why should I not do it? Because now actually the majority of my income, not all of that, but the majority of the income is already in Bitcoin now. Obviously, I get, for example, YouTube ad revenue. I cannot change that to Bitcoin. I get from my merch store that is connected with YouTube. I cannot change that in Bitcoin. There's like bigger fights to fight. But sponsorships and other things, the majority of the income is already in Bitcoin. And now I get to the luxury problem of I have to spend my Bitcoin in order to pay my bills slowly. This year, actually, I could pay my bills with the fiat that coming in. So I was like, I just use those fiats that come in and directly spend it in fiat again. But next year it will be definitely something different. But there's those weird rules in Austria where you actually have to pay capital gains tax. I mean, I still have some Bitcoin bought before that tax rule. So those are tax free actually, because the rule was also in Austria. But that is something that I'm really curious for next year, and I have to research more how I actually then go ahead and do it. Also, just with the documentation, I'm like someone that wants to be legal. I don't want to not tell the tax officers, and being legal requires a lot of documentation and all those things. So I have to really research how I will do it next year.
Yep. So something I can recommend, at least talking to your local tax office about. This is a big discussion I had with my local tax office here, because I don't, like I said, I could kind of probably get away with not reporting things, but at the moment I do. I report everything because I think it's the right thing to do, and it's easier, and I'm going to avoid potential trouble in my life. So I do report it, and I had a big conversation with the tax office, and essentially I convinced them that I should be following the reporting requirements for foreign currency, not the reporting requirements for digital assets under German law. And the tax situation is about the same, but the reporting requirements are much, much lower and easier for foreign currency, at least here in Germany. So, I can't speak for any other country. But the way that I did that was essentially pointed out that Bitcoin is a foreign currency. It's the legal tender of the nation of El Salvador. So, they can't treat it differently than they would treat any other foreign currency, US dollar, Australian dollar, whatever. They are foreign currencies, and so is Bitcoin.
And it's already bigger than the British pound.
Indeed. Yep.
So it's not like a very small imaginary thing. It's it's a big thing. I'm curious. Have you noticed any change since you just are completely on a Bitcoin standard and you converted everything and you try to live there? Is there anything different from like just buying Bitcoin and holding it and still being in that fiat system?
I'd say yes. A lot of Bitcoiners talk about time preference, and I think that becomes a lot more noticeable when all of the money that you have is in Bitcoin. Um, if you have some Bitcoin and some fiat, and you're walking past a place which sells a milkshake, and you think, "Oh, I want a milkshake." Chances are you're just going to throw a couple of euro or dollars or whatever on the milkshake and not think about it, because the value of that isn't meaningful to you. But if you are holding it in Bitcoin, then you actually think more about it, because you think, okay, do I actually want this milkshake? Sometimes the answer is still going to be yes. Sometimes, yeah, I want to have a nicer life. I don't want to, live like a pauper and sell all my chairs, as the meme on Twitter goes. To me, that's not a reasonable life. I want to have a good life. I want to enjoy things. But I do now tend to stop and think more, is this something I actually want to buy? Is this something I actually want to give up money for, when I know that money is going to be worth more in the future?
I think especially relevant in a bull run where you just see 40% up run in 1 month, where you're like, should I buy that new phone, or can I get through with that old phone for 1 year more? So it's really interesting. So the main difference is basically how you look at opportunity costs by spending your own money, because you actually know you're spending your Bitcoin and you're not spending fiat. So that actually changed something in your brain, where you think about the opportunity cost about that purchase way more.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, it's more of a recent thing, but I've also started thinking a lot more in terms of the price of things in sats. And I think that probably also has a lot to do with where I live, and also just my own unique circumstances. So, I'm in Germany, as I said, but I'm actually quite close to both the Czech border and the Polish border. So there are three national currencies within a short drive of where I live. Plus, the company that I'm working for at the moment is British, so UK pounds is a frequent fiat currency that I'm dealing with. And I mentioned earlier, I have a credit card that I can pay off using Bitcoin. That credit card is actually denominated in Australian dollars. So overall, there's oh, and for a while I was also working for a US company who was paying me in US dollars. So overall, there's 6 fiat currencies all around me that have some kind of influence on my life, and they always have these kind of floating exchange rates compared to each other. So what's stable? What should I actually think in my head in terms of what is the thing that I count the value of something in? What is my internal unit of account? And over time, it just drifted towards becoming Bitcoin. So for a while, it was euro. For a while, it was kind of a mix of different things. So maybe euro, maybe US dollars. And I'd kind of treat things interchangeably. So, oh yeah, this thing is worth $500 US, and this thing over here is worth €1,000, and I would then have to kind of even calculate what does that mean in relation to each other if I needed to. But now I've drifted more towards, okay, this thing is 5,000 sats, and I just have an intuitive idea in my head what 5,000 sats is.
I guess that's difficult to calculate, but you probably are getting good in it if you do it for a month or two. There's okay, 1,000 sats is $1 or so, something like that. I mean, now it's kind of easy because we had that $100,000 mark, so it gets easier with the round numbers. But yeah, unit of account, that's the last step, right? That's the last hurdle we have to get over with Bitcoin. It's impressive that you're already doing that. That's something that I'm not even close to doing it. I measure my net worth. So if I want to be okay, did I grow my net worth or not? I don't even look at the fiat number, because I think it's a false number. But if you look at the Bitcoin number, it's like, oh yeah, like I've grown a little bit, like I've done something this year. Because if you have the same amount of Bitcoin this year and last year, I wouldn't consider you getting wealthier. Of course, your purchasing power went up, but I already consider my net worth to be only in Bitcoin. So I look at the Bitcoin number of it. But with daily expenses, I never did that calculation. I once had like a small calculator on my iPhone in a widget where I can just type in the euro amount and get the sats. So that was a fun time, but it was just like, why should I do that right now? But if you're at that stage, that is really cool. If you're already there.
Yeah, so for me, it's not something I even deliberately tried to do. I think it was just kind of a natural consequence of realizing that Bitcoin is my primary money, and it's all of these other currencies are just kind of free floating around it. So at some point, my brain just kind of latched on. Okay, that thing cost me 20,000 sats, and I intuitively know more what that means than if somebody says that thing cost me, I don't know, 200 US dollars. I'd actually have to think, okay, 200 US dollars, that's, oh yeah, that's about 20,000 sats, okay. And then I can, understand it better.
Yeah, that makes definitely sense. It also shows the power of what Bitcoin actually wants to do, like the one money protocol for the world, and not dealing just because you drive from the border from Germany to Czech to have to deal with a different currency, which makes absolutely no sense at all. Why we have so many different currencies and why do we have to exchange that? And then there's like the exchange market making profits from that. I'm like that's a market we can just destroy with Bitcoin, hopefully.
Exactly. Yep. 100%.
And you also said, and we know it because Samantha was already on the show. You are a father in Bitcoin with a daughter who is already into Bitcoin. And I loved one thing. That is what was one takeaway from the podcast with your daughter was she's like, Bitcoin, I presume that Bitcoin is normal and everyone is already using Bitcoin because she was used to it in the household. And then she learned, oh, like there's like a fiat thing going on, which is amazing to see. How is it to be a father in Bitcoin, especially with a daughter that is also heavily in Bitcoin?
So it's great. Being a father is, of course, one of the most difficult jobs in the world. It's also one of the most rewarding jobs in the world. Having these, I've got two kids, and having these two young human beings basically growing up in front of me and learning from me, and trying to understand the world. And for me, Bitcoin has always just been something that I have taught them about as a part of the world. So I've never really treated it as something different. A lot of the time, people will come to me and say, when's the right time to introduce my kids to Bitcoin? And I'll kind of, my typical answer to that is something along the lines of, well, when is the right time to teach your kid what money is? When's the right time to teach your kid what a car is? It's just, it's a part of the world around you. It's something which exists. So I teach it in the same way that I teach anything else. I'll teach them scientific facts, I'll teach them interesting philosophical ideas, and I will teach them about, Bitcoin as this thing that exists in the world, just like anything else.
It makes sense also because like as soon as they can understand it, they should learn about it, and from whom better than from their own parents. So and it's also I think I remember that she's switching to homeschooling or is already homeschooling. I don't remember correctly.
Switching to. So here in Germany, homeschooling is completely illegal. It's not allowed at all under any circumstances. So we are looking at moving very soon. The details of that still need to be finalized. But yeah, as soon as we are out of this country, we are homeschooling. Yeah.
Oh, so you're one more of the they are leaving Germany crowd, which is a big crowd.
It is, yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. What made you switch from Germany away? Why leave that country?
So it's probably a number of things, but I'm obviously not German, as anyone can probably hear from my accent. But I've lived here for about 17 years now, so quite a large chunk of my life. And when I first moved here, I thought this is a country which has a lot of opportunity, a lot of opportunities for things to go right, a lot of chances to build a nice, solid, good European society. Um, and I feel like over the years that I've been here, it has been getting nothing but worse. Um, violence has been increasing, inequality has been increasing, the number of homeless people you see on the streets, the amount of general petty street crime, the amount of um, crime directly from government officials. So things like seeing police attacking people at protests and so on, rather than just doing their job and defending like they're supposed to. So the amount of that has been increasing constantly. So that's kind of the big push for me to say I'd like to go somewhere else. But then kind of the nail in the coffin, the straw that broke the camel's back, whatever you want to call it, the last bit that made me say it was essentially the education side of things. So I've got two kids, both of them were at a private school that was costing me a fortune. Both of them are now at a public school, and the German public education system is absolutely terrible. And it's taking so much of not only time but also their will and their joy of learning. It's in my opinion, it's making them less interested in the world around them, and to me, that's the most horrible thing to see. To see my kids go from being, "Hey, I want to learn. I love learning. Tell me all about the world," to being, do I have to do this? Do I have to learn about maths? When am I ever going to use this in the real world? The passion for learning just kind of got crushed out of them by this education system, and I want to reinstill that in them, and I don't think I can do that while they are at a German school. So that was kind of the last thing, and I have to get them out of here. Yeah.
That's 100 true. By the way, there's the same thing for Austria. I heard someone saying that moved out of Austria, that Austria is 5 years better than Germany, but if they're continuing like that in 5 years, the same as in Germany right now, and Switzerland is 5 years better than Austria, something along those lines. I get more and more hope, honestly, with the Austrian politicians that I see right now, especially when I see what people are voting for and what kind of agendas they're voting for. So it gives me a lot of hope that the population is waking up to the realities. But I actually watch politics right now very closely in Austria only because I can move in an instant. Like, I don't have any income from Austria, actually. Like no income stream from me is from Austria. It does not make sense for me to be in Austria. So I can be very quick away. But I still feel like there's hope. And when I talk with Germans and when I see Germany, I feel like there I probably would have already left. Really cool. I don't know if you want to reveal where you move, but one thing I really want to know is like, what role has Bitcoin played for you in deciding where to move? Like what big of a thing was Bitcoin for you, or was the education and the other things you mentioned, the proper ones, and Bitcoin just being like, oh, it shouldn't be it shouldn't be China.
Yeah, so essentially that it's primarily the other things. So yeah, I don't mind saying we're planning on moving to the UK, and the main reason for that is that my wife is German born, spent her entire life here, and doesn't want to be too far away from her parents. So we need to be somewhere which is easy travel back to where her parents are. So that kind of rules out, for example, moving to Central America, which might have been on my list if not for the fact that that would be too far for my wife. We're planning on moving to the UK, and it's largely around the things that I already mentioned. In the UK, homeschooling is completely allowed, no problem. So that's that problem solved. And I am somewhat concerned about what I see happening in politics over there, but I think that's largely true in most of the world. No matter where we move, politics is going to be a problem, especially for my political outlook in general. I got into Bitcoin in 2010, And my journey into Bitcoin came out of my political journey. I've always been interested in anarchism as a political philosophy. So not just, chaos, but actual well thought out political anarchy, rules without rulers. How do you establish a society that has rules and has the people deciding what we want to do, but doesn't have a centralized lawgiver, doesn't have a centralized person or group of people to say this is how society has to run. So that was always something of great interest to me. And one of the big problems I always saw was money. Money has this massively centralized approach to it. So how would that work in a decentralized way? And then along came Bitcoin. So it was obvious for me to kind of jump in and become a Bitcoiner. It just seemed like the perfect fit because it's what I was already looking into for every other aspect of society. So, money being one of the big ones, Bitcoin was just obvious. Bitcoin, I don't see it being a problem anywhere that we would be likely to move. I think it's already too big for governments to say things like, oh, yeah, we're going to unilaterally ban Bitcoin in the country. I don't think that will happen even here in Germany, which is quite strict on how people manage their money and what people do with their money and wanting to see what you're doing with your money and so on. I can't even imagine Germany banning Bitcoin. It's too late for that kind of thing.
Absolutely. I mean, there is this thing of taxes. I think Italy increased the taxes on Bitcoin heavily, where I'm like, okay, nobody will move to Italy, I guess, and they will move out of Italy. I think from 20 of like 40 or something like that. And in France, I just heard, but I think that's not law right now. I think it's just a discussion where they think about unrealized capital gains on Bitcoin, which is obviously an absurd idea and completely BS, but that's I think the only last thing that I'm worried about, that politicians just try to tax the hell out of it. I am completely with you. They will not ban it. It's just too much. Like, you cannot do it anymore. It's like banning the internet, something like that. We know how it goes in North Korea and how those countries end up. But taxes, I guess, is the only thing that I would still look at in terms of Bitcoin. I have no clue what the rule in the UK for that is.
Yeah, it's complicated, but it's not too arduous, but it's complicated. But yeah, overall, I think one thing as Bitcoiners that we do need to be careful of is reading too much into what happens. For example, with that proposal in France, I actually honestly think, from what I've seen of it, the people who wrote it weren't even thinking about Bitcoin at all. It was simply caught up because they essentially said, we want the government to have more money in order to do the things that we want to do. Let's look at unrealized capital gains tax. So essentially, what if people are holding any kind of unproductive asset, I think was their wording, that unproductive asset should have some kind of unrealized capital gains tax. I very much doubt they were thinking of Bitcoin much at all. Like, maybe it was a side note at some point. Oh yeah, and there's these cryptocurrency things that gets thrown into the bucket. But I think the biggest thing we actually need to be concerned about is when they start talking about Bitcoin directly. When politicians talk about Bitcoin directly, that's when you should really sit up and pay attention, far more than when they do other things and just kind of throw Bitcoin into the same bucket.
I think that's the problem that all governments right now face. They have a budget problem. Like, the debt is just growing, and people are like, hey, like, costs are increasing. And so they have two options. They can increase taxes, print more money, or they can save.
Yeah.
And governments don't want to stop spending. They really don't want to save, but they have to. And yeah, even in Austria right now is an interesting conversation going on, because right now the new government is forming, where one side wants to have no taxes at all, and one side is like, oh, like, let's increase taxes. let's just increase the taxes, and then we then we are solving the part of the budget that is missing. And essentially what they are now proposing is increasing the taxes on properties. So property taxes. Yeah. Why? Because properties cannot move out of Austria. Bitcoin can. stocks to a certain extent can. Other things can way more easily remove out of Austria. Properties, selling a property, it's a longer process of selling Bitcoin or selling stocks or Bitcoin. You can just, it's not even in any jurisdiction actually. So it's really hard to, or the hardest asset to tax, I think. What I'm also curious about was outside of the EU a factor for you?
Not so much, perhaps slightly, because of course the EU can be problematic at times. They can, but they also actually, I'm not going to say the EU's terrible in every single way, because they actually also, do have some advantages. One of the difficult problems with talking about breaking up a large governmental body is that you actually end up with more authoritarianism in smaller groups. So this is something I see a lot in the US, which I think people don't realize as much when they say, okay, we want to, remove as much power from the federal government as possible and give it out to the states, giving the states more power, actually tends to make people less free. It tends to decrease freedom as the individual states tend to become more authoritarian. And I actually see a similar potential with the European Union. If the EU breaks up, which I actually think it probably will at some point, probably even within my lifetime, I don't think the EU has a long life left ahead of it. And when that happens, if and when that happens, I actually see a lot of people suffering quite badly under authoritarian regimes, because people want to fill a power vacuum and they will jump in and they will take power and they will want to control others. And ultimately, that's, like I said, that's the reason I'm a Bitcoiner, is because I'm an anarchist. I care more about individual freedom than I do about almost anything else. But I think individual freedom is often misunderstood. It's often misunderstood as, I should be allowed to do anything I want. The problem with the idea of I should be allowed to do anything I want is that includes limiting other people's freedoms. If you want maximal freedom for everyone, you do actually have to have some kind of societal system which ensures maximal freedom for everyone. And that's what all serious discussions about anarchism are actually about. They're about, how do we organize ourselves? How do we come together as people, as individuals, to maximize the freedom for each of us? And I think that's something which is not discussed well enough in most discussions about the topic, even in the Bitcoin space, because it's quite funny. Bitcoin already works that way. Bitcoin is a consensus algorithm. Bitcoin is very notably something that requires that everyone is behaving in the same way and agreeing to the same rule sets. Otherwise, they are not a part of the network anymore. If I all of a sudden set my node to say, I own all of that Bitcoin that you do, then, well, yeah, according to my node, I do, and I can access it because I've got special rules for those UTXOs. But if I try and broadcast that, broadcast the transaction to the rest of the network, which spends one of your UTXOs, everybody else will say, no, that's not the rules that I agree to. Therefore, that's not valid. That's not okay. So that kind of consensus approach is something that is needed outside of Bitcoin as well, in order to actually organize society and not just have a free-for-all, I do whatever I want kind of freedom.
I partnered up with Coin Vigilante. This is the most beautiful Bitcoin timepiece that I ever saw created by anyone. Look at that beauty. I love it so much. Coin Vigilante made a perfect Bitcoin watch. That's the perfect, subtle, elegant way to go out there and show that you are a Bitcoiner. And that watch brand is Bitcoin only. And Coin Vigilante just dropped a completely new and amazing Genesis edition of their watch collections. You have the date of the first ever mined Bitcoin block in there, and of course also the block height and which epoch we are currently in. I love the level of detail they put in this masterpiece, and make sure to check out those amazing Coin Vigilante timepieces down in the descriptions. I love those watches so much. If you watch or listen to my podcast on a regular basis, I guess you already bought some Bitcoin. And now the most important step is to keep their Bitcoin. Keep them secure in a hardware wallet. My personal recommendation for hardware wallet is the BitBox. It's super secure. It's simple to set up. It's also a perfect gift for a friend who has still their Bitcoin on an exchange. And you can get a 5% discount with the code Robin at the checkout. Visit bitbox.swiss/Robin to get your BitBox. And the next step is to really level up your sovereignty as an individual. You have to have the most secure self-custody setup. You have to secure your own devices. You have to protect your privacy. You have to set up an inheritance plan. And depending on where you live, you even want to have a plan B, a citizenship where you can move in case something goes really, really wrong. And through all those steps, the Bitcoin way is guiding you through step by step. And if you visit thebitcoinway.com/partners/Robin, you even get a 30-minute free call to find out how you can level up your sovereignty. That's super interesting to look at. So the EU could actually increase the freedoms because it allows the smaller ones are not as authoritarian. I never considered that actually. Is that a short-term thing, or is that something that is actually long-term there?
No, absolutely, it's a short-term thing. So the problem with these supranational things like the EU is they are naturally authoritarian themselves. They will naturally restrict freedoms and so on. The problem, it's not that the EU increases freedom. It doesn't. It's that the breakup of the EU would decrease freedom. So it's not that they are increasing it. It's just that getting rid of them would decrease it. And that's where you get these kinds of problems. And I think, so yeah, I can't solve all the world's problems myself. I don't know the answer to these kinds of things. But I think one of the best ways to get rid of authoritarian governments, whether it's at a national or a supranational or even a subnational level, the best way to get rid of authoritarianism is to make it obsolete, make it unimportant, make it not capable, get rid of its teeth. So Bitcoin does that with money. We don't need in Bitcoin to say, okay, we're going to establish a new central bank, and this new central bank is responsible for Bitcoin, and it's a better kind of money, and then kick out the old central bank. All we need to do is make Bitcoin so good that other currencies become worthless and the central banks have no teeth anymore. They can't do anything bad because they have no power. That's how you stop authoritarianism, by building something better, not by trying to actually kick it out. I think that's the problem the Marxists made back in the early days of socialism. They said, we're going to take over the government, kick out the current government, and then build a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. They built a new government, sure, and it was just as authoritarian and terrible as the previous ones, because you give somebody power, they don't want to give it up. They say it's for the people, and they'll use the language of it being for the people, but it really wasn't. The USSR was an authoritarian regime, and that is what happens with authoritarianism in general. If you try and build a new centralized structure and take over the old one, you will have the same problems. Instead, you need to build something from the ground up, which makes the old thing obsolete, not just replaced.
So basically, when we have options like El Salvador and other countries that are building something better, this in hindsight then also makes Germany and other countries long-term better, because they have to kind of keep up with that, or otherwise they will lose the best talents to those countries.
Yes, but I would even say I look at it on a smaller scale than that. I care much more about what Bitcoin Beach in El Zonte did, and what Berlin in El Salvador, not Berlin, Germany, but Berlin, El Salvador. I care much more about what they are doing than what the government of El Salvador is doing with Bitcoin, because those bottom-up approaches cannot be co-opted and destroyed as easily as a centralized government. At some point, President Bukele could turn around and be evil. He could, steal people's Bitcoin. He could say, okay, I'm enforcing some kind of draconian laws whereby, you have to give up your Bitcoin to the government. I don't think he's going to do that. But what about when he's not in power anymore? What about the next guy and the next guy after that and the next guy after that? As long as you've got a centralized government doing these things, those risks exist. With the bottom up approach that you get in local circular economies, you don't have those kinds of concerns as much because you can freely join or leave any kind of community approach like that. So yeah, I think El Salvador's great. I love it as a country. I think it's beautiful. I love seeing the progress there. I think I've been there 3 years in a row now, and every year I see more and more improvements. I think it's great, and I'm certainly not going to say hey, Bukele is a terrible dictator or anything like that. He's certainly not. But as long as it is a centralized government, those risks exist. So yeah.
Especially with a guy that is so popular. I think being a leader that is extremely popular has his disadvantages because he can also misuse that, obviously. But yeah, I think he has done a great job. So it's an indicator that he might do also a great job the next 5 years. And will be interesting to look at El Salvador. El Salvador is also an interesting country to move at. It's really hard because it's like a very long flight from Austria. It's like almost 24 hours of total travel from like door to door. But it's definitely an interesting country. Central America in general is very interesting, and I met a lot of Germans in Central America. There is a lot of people seem to move there. But yeah, also America is interesting to look at if they move in the right direction. How do you look in general at what America has done this year and what the presidential election is? Is that more of like just hype and just saying the right words to be elected, or could that actually bring change in how the USA is functioning in the future?
I think both. So I make absolutely no secret of the fact that I think Donald Trump is dangerous and relatively stupid. I don't think he's a smart man. I think he's essentially very much a businessman who will say what is necessary in order to get people to like him, to get votes, to control people in the way that he wants. But he also surrounds himself with people who have other agendas. And I think those other agendas are incredibly dangerous at times. Some of them can have positive results. I think it is going to be relatively good for Bitcoin in terms of getting it out there into the understanding of people, getting more people to be aware of Bitcoin, make it more visible, make it more accepted as a thing that is okay. Because a lot of people still have this perception Bitcoin's this weird, strange thing, mostly used by scammers, and I don't want to touch it, I don't want to learn about it. But if you see, hey, the government is saying they are setting up a Bitcoin reserve, the government is saying you can use Bitcoin as a medium of exchange and we're going to remove taxes on it, and that sort of thing, I think will have some very positive effects. But I think that's incidental and not really even part of the core plan, if there even is any kind of core plan, of that incoming government. I think it really is just this incidental thing. I think we see that with the way that Donald Trump went and talked at the Bitcoin conference there in Nashville, and then almost immediately went away and launched some kind of shitcoin type thing. It's he doesn't understand it. He isn't even surrounded by that many people who understand it. There's a few, and those few I think are probably going to do some very good things for Bitcoin, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be doing good things for everything else that I consider valuable, especially in terms of overall freedom. I think freedoms in the US are actually eroding at the moment, and it doesn't matter whether it's the Democrats or the Republicans in power. Every single administration over the last 20 to 40 years has been reducing the freedoms that the people have. And I don't see that changing.
Just interesting. That's mostly Bitcoin is extremely, what should I say, extremely positive towards the next administration. Not apparent, not necessarily because of Trump. They look at RFK quite positively. They look at Vivek Ramaswamy quite positively. But yeah, it's an interesting mix of characters in there, and also that with Elon Musk in there, that's a completely unknown. Will be interesting how it pays out.
Yeah, it is. So I'm always going to be hopeful that things are better than I assume, but right now I don't have any evidence to think it's actually going to be as good as a lot of people are saying. It's also worth noting that as a classical anarchist, I am definitely not politically aligned to the vast majority of loud voices on Bitcoin Twitter. So the vast majority of I call them LARPitarians, so libertarians, but they're just LARPing it because they've never thought their philosophy through. They've never really gone deep into what it potentially means to have a truly libertarian society. They throw around terms like anarcho-capitalism without even realizing that capitalism as a concept is at odds with anarchism as a concept. Capitalism actually requires centralized control as a political philosophy. So those two, you cannot be an anarcho-capitalist from my understanding of those words, and I guess from what most political philosophers would say, that doesn't actually work. I get what they mean when they say it, and they actually mean some kind of completely open free market anarchist, which is actually different to capitalism, but it's still something they haven't thought through enough to really have a coherent political philosophy, and they tend to be very self-contradictory at times. So yeah, I don't politically align with a lot of Bitcoiners, and I think that does lead to a lot of arguments a lot of the time online, but they can be productive arguments. I think I can learn some things from other people, and they can learn some things from me.
Really interesting. What kind of ideology or like political direction do you think Bitcoin will bring to the world if it changes anything at all?
So I think that's really difficult to say, because I think Bitcoin will always be a part of something else. It will be a part of other movements. People like to say Bitcoin fixes this. Bitcoin does fix a lot of things. Bitcoin doesn't fix everything in the world. Anyone who tries to say it is dreaming. So the things that Bitcoin fixes are generally in the direction of freedom-loving governments, freedom-loving ideas. It's very difficult for a truly dictatorial authoritarian to use and be interested in Bitcoin internally. They can definitely use it externally. I can see, for example, North Korea wanting to amass a large amount of Bitcoin and then use it externally in order to increase their wealth and do things in their country to increase their own power. But to actually use it internally would be quite damaging for them because of the freedom that Bitcoin allows. So it's kind of got these two faces to it, and it depends on how governments use it as to what kind of benefits or disadvantages it gives them. So yeah, Bitcoin is freedom tech, but what that freedom looks like and how people wield it probably matters more than just the basics. Yeah.
The last nation I want to get over with you. I didn't plan that, but it
That's all
just
right.
erupted. The last nation that I'm really interested in your opinion is, you probably looked at it, is Switzerland. It's out of the EU. It has, as I see it, a really good functioning direct democracy. It has a heavy load of costs to it, but also lower taxes. So depends on what your income stream is depending on. How do you look at Switzerland?
Switzerland does in general give me a lot of hope, because it is, like you said, it's a good example of direct democracy mostly working. It's not perfect. I think every system has its flaws, but as far as a long-running functional direct democracy goes, there is no better example than Switzerland. So I can imagine them benefiting greatly from Bitcoin if there's a lot more activity happening there to actually start implementing things. So I was actually in Switzerland recently in Thun, near Bern, for a small conference called Bitcoin Helps. It was actually the first time I gave an entire workshop in German, which was very difficult for me, not my native language, but I managed it somehow. And yeah, I really appreciate the overall sense of community organization, I would guess I'd say, in Switzerland. People feel like they can make a difference in their society, which is quite different to the feeling in Germany. In Germany, people think of, oh yeah, I can vote for whoever's in charge, and then they're the ones who actually get to do stuff. In Switzerland, there's a lot more feel that if you want to change the society that you're in, get out there and change it. So I think that's a very positive thing. And if they start doing a lot more stuff with Bitcoin, I can see Bitcoin taking off there very well. And of course, in Lugano, that's already happening to an extent. I know that there are some discussions in and around Bern at the moment for that kind of thing to happen, or for more Bitcoin stuff to happen. So we'll see how things go there. I wouldn't be against the idea of living in Switzerland one day. The only reason it wasn't on our list of places to consider for moving with this move now is largely the costs. It's as you said, it's quite an expensive place, and I'm not that much of a rich man, despite discovering Bitcoin in 2010. I'd rather increase my Bitcoin holdings and not decrease them over time.
Yeah, absolutely. Switzerland is costly. I always look at Switzerland as a great escape patch for me, because I live in Austria. It's very close to Switzerland. I probably drive just a few hours from my place to come to the Swiss border. Maybe 5 hours, 6 hours, something like that, which just means I'm really quickly in Switzerland, which means I really quickly am back at where I was growing up with like parents and friends and stuff like that. But it's it's expensive. It's like 3 times, sometimes 4 times the cost of Austria, depending on what you look at. So it's really an expensive place. You probably need a really good running company to make it worthwhile, as the taxes are quite lower, especially for corporations, but also for income in general. So if you are a high income earner or have a company running, then it might make sense because just tax savings. But in general, it's an expensive place. Or if you have a work in Switzerland, they also pay more than all of a sudden. It could also make a huge difference. But yeah, really cool. Then you have been, as we said before, long in the space, and I think there's always new people coming into the space, or like people that have just been 2-3 years in the space. What do you make in general out of this year with Trump, with ETFs, with the halving, with maybe soon the 100K, maybe if we release that, we're already over there, who knows, with so many things happening, so many milestones happens. What do you make out of this year?
This year's been an interesting one. I think there's been a lot more social media influence on Bitcoin itself, which is not necessarily a positive thing. The loudest voices tend to get a lot of control, where previously I don't think that happened quite as much. So to give an example, there's all of the arguments about new opcodes. So having some kind of CTV cat type opcode, and people's decisions and what people's allegiances to different alternatives, or do something or don't do something or whatever, tend to be influenced by the people who are advocating for or against things, rather than on the technical merits or other reasonable things to consider. So it'd be like saying, I'm going to Godwin this discussion here, but Adolf Hitler was in favor of animal rights, therefore we should be against animal rights. It's a stupid argument. He did some absolutely terrible things. He actually surprisingly did a couple of good things, and in my opinion, animal rights was one of those. So I think arguing that a particular opcode proposal is bad because of the people who are promoting it is just silly. But I think that is actually influencing development decisions around Bitcoin, and that's a negative that I see for this year. A positive, however, that I see for this year is there seems to be a lot more focus now on actually educating people rather than just yelling at them. So in previous years, probably the last 4 or 5 years, somebody would come along and say, oh, I'm kind of interested in Bitcoin, but I'm too scared to self custody, so I'm just going to keep all of my coins on Coinbase. And on Twitter, they would get all of a sudden spammed by people saying, "Have fun staying poor," which it doesn't help anything. It doesn't do anything useful or good. All it it's just insulting and childish, really. But that was very common up until probably this year, where I've seen a lot more. Oh, I can help you with that. I can point you to some resources. I can show you a good video from some podcaster or person who's demonstrating things to say, take a look at this. It's not that hard to self custody. Here's what you need to know. Here's what you should learn. Hit me up via DM if you need any more info. I'm seeing that a lot more, and I think that's definitely a huge positive this year. It feels more like the early days of Bitcoin, back before 2013 or so. Everybody was willing to help everybody else, and that disappeared for a few years. But I think it looks like it's coming back, and I like that.
It's interesting how on the one side you saw that it got more screamy, where
Yeah.
the irrational side kind of came out of humans, and the other side where the rational side, let's help them, let's educate them, comes out more. Are those things out of the consequence that the space in general is just growing, and like the next wave of Bitcoiners that might be far different from those who entered in 2012 out of different reasons, are now just entering the space, and maybe also more institutionalized, maybe more from the fiat side of things?
Quite possibly, yes. I think there's a lot more diversity now appearing in the Bitcoin space than there has been over the last 10 years or so. The early days of Bitcoin were also very, very diverse. So it wasn't just a monoculture politically. It wasn't a monoculture on, gender, race, political beliefs, all of these different things. It was quite diverse. And then for a while, it kind of became young, white, Western men. And that was 80 to 90% of people in Bitcoin. And they were the loudest voices on social media. They were the ones who were basically saying, we control Bitcoin. This is who we are. This is what Bitcoiners are. Young, white, Western, right-wing men. But if you actually look at the statistics of Bitcoin holders, so I saw somebody post it recently. Unfortunately, I don't remember who it was, but I saw some nice statistics posted of who are Bitcoin holders, and it was kind of broken down by age and political leanings and so on. And it really is actually quite diverse. So it's more a case of who's loud on social media compared to who the actual people are. So I think that's probably what's happening now, is that more people are finding their voice and willing to actually speak up as the space itself grows. So people who maybe felt like they weren't represented in Bitcoin are now seeing that they actually are, because Bitcoin is for everyone.
I have something interesting that I share every once in a while. It's just my YouTube statistics, and I have, depending on the month, around 50,000 to 100,000 people tuning into at least one video per month. So I think the base is not huge, but it's somewhat representative, I guess. And what you see here, interesting enough, even though I'm very young, I'm 26, my listener base is quite way older than I am. For example, I have over 65, almost 7%, and under 25, there's just like 2%, or not even 2%.
Yep.
So like under my age, there are like 2% people, and over 65 years old is 7%. And then the average is probably somewhere around the 44 years old, or like 40 years old mark, which is probably the real where we see from age wise. I don't have any more insights, of course, like the countries, but yeah, it's English speaking, so of course Germans will listen less and other people, but that's kind of, I was shocked how mature the audience already is.
Yeah, absolutely. I did notice there though it skewed very heavily male, something like 93 point something percent male, 6.6% female. So
Yeah, exactly, 93 percent male, and it's been it moves around between. In the beginning it was like 2%, so like in the beginning it was really bad, but also the first 20 or 30 episodes were just males, and now I actually actively seek females to be on the show, because funny, I get DMs from people that say like, hey, I'm here, I want to be on the show. Never ever I got it from a woman that hasn't been poked by someone else.
right.
I have, for example, Rachel Geyer, and she says to women, she's like, hey, DM Robin to be on his show. But never ever had a woman that's like, hey, I'm here, want to be on the show. So I have to actively seek them, so they can be on the show and say like, hey, do you want to be in my show? So that I had to realize to actually seek them. So then I also have the females on the guest, and then actually it went from like 2% to 5, 7, 8. And the highest was at like 9%. But I'm also male, so with a female host probably would be better. I know Natalie Prunell. She has a huge following, and she's probably the biggest female podcast hoster in Bitcoin, and she has a 20% rate of females, and I guess that's then the highest someone can get in in Bitcoin. But yeah, it's heavily male.
Yeah. So no, that's actually where I would actually be interested to see how much of that is kind of a chicken and egg situation or an in-group bias situation. So it's possible there's a large untapped group of women Bitcoiners out there who simply have never heard of you, so they don't even know to get in touch with you. Their audience, or the people who they talk to, and your audience just doesn't have any overlaps yet. So there's very few ways that you can actually reach out to them. It's something I noticed, especially, for example, if you were to look at Bitcoin Twitter, so you look at X as they call it now, but okay, I'm going to keep calling it Twitter. If you look at Bitcoin Twitter, you could easily think that the vast majority of Bitcoiners are these young white Western right wing men, but the reality is not that. So it's more a case of how do we actually go out and find everybody else who isn't those people and actually let them be aware, hey, this is something you could be interested in. Maybe, be on this show, maybe just watch it, become part of the audience, interact with it in some way. And how many of them will actually want to do that versus, saying, oh, I've seen what Bitcoin social media is like, I don't want to be a part of that at all. So, you get this kind of reinforcement loop happening. And I think that's something we need to combat if we want Bitcoin to truly be for everyone. We need to stop excluding people, stop kind of pushing people out. And it's not even deliberate exclusion. I don't think anybody, or there are a few, but very few people are saying, hey, we don't want these people in Bitcoin. Get rid of those people, force them out. There's not a lot of that. Most people say, yeah, Bitcoin is for everyone. But I don't think we are, in general, doing enough to actually go out and find those people and bring them in and say, hey, take a look at this. You could be interested in this. So I think that's where, there is some work to be done.
100%. And the very, very small part that I want to play is just giving as many people as possible an audience with the podcast here. That's why I have, within 1 year now, I've done it now 1 year and 7 days now, my podcast. And you're my 329th guest on the show. And I had only, I think, 10 people 2 times on. So it's actually like 300 over 300 different guests, probably even like more than that, because sometimes I have like 2 or 3 guests at the same time on. So it's probably like 340 different guests on my show, and where I can actually go into those deeper regions and these wider regions, and not just have Michael Saylor, Jeff Booth, Natalie Brunel, and the same kind of 30 people that are on all the podcasts on, but have that wider range, have the deeper range of just many interesting Bitcoiners. And that's actually a compliment I always get not always, but like regularly get in the comment section, that my guest variety is just so huge, because I do it 7 times per week, and don't do solo episodes, don't do repeated episodes all the time. I see other podcasts that have the same guests on 4 times a year. I'm like, oh, that's a lot.
Yep, no, absolutely. I think that is a good thing to strive to do, and keep doing it. Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we'll definitely do that. We are already approaching that over the 1 hour mark. What do you expect for 2025? And maybe with that, because we are kind of entering maybe a huge bull run, what advice do you have for people where this is their first real bull run? They entered kind of after the 2021 bull run, and what do you suggest to people?
So, okay, that's 2 things. So what I expect for this coming year, 2025, is I expect to see a lot more merchant adoption. And I could say that just because it's my job at the moment. I'm CTO at a company called Musket. We make merchant adoption solutions. But beyond that, I see a lot more people interested in the idea of using Bitcoin as a medium of exchange, not just a store of value. So I think merchants are going to pick up on that. And as there is more demand, there will be more acceptance. If enough people walk into a shop and say, can I pay with Bitcoin? At some point, the shopkeeper is going to say, yeah, I should probably accept Bitcoin. So that, I think, will start to pick up a lot in the next year. And my advice to people in general is don't look at the exchange rate as much as you probably do at the moment. The exchange rate of Bitcoin is incredibly volatile in the short term and pretty smoothly and steadily going up over the long term. So don't worry so much about, hey, my net worth is now this in euro, my net worth is now that in euro. It's kind of a meaningless thing. What you should care about is what are the properties of Bitcoin that are meaningful to you. So for me, it's the fact that I can send a transaction to anyone who I choose to at any time I choose to without the asking permission from somebody else. That to me is the reason that I'm a Bitcoiner. That's the most important thing. And all of the other things around that certainly help. There are other projects which theoretically allow that kind of thing, but they have other negative properties, like centralized control of some kind, or maybe really bad monetary policies. So that's the reason I find Bitcoin valuable. And therefore, for me, if somebody else is interested in those same things, they should go out and try it. Make some Bitcoin transactions. Find a shop near you. Go to btcmap.org. Find a shop that accepts Bitcoin. Get yourself a Lightning wallet or whatever, and then go and buy yourself bread rolls or a beer or a meal or whatever else with Bitcoin. Just do it once to try it and feel how it works. Get an idea of a real world use case. Because I think so many people look at it from the theoretical side and say, oh, okay, I get how it works. I've learned it in theory, but they've never actually gone out and just bought something using Bitcoin. So I think that's something more people should do and really understand it at a more personal level.
That's really good. I think it will also push Bitcoin adoption really, really good forward if we exactly do that with like medium of exchange adoption, and it educates people, and that's where like the next phase of Bitcoin really comes in. Really cool. We have always one question at the end of the podcast, like 2 questions, but one that is always the same question. What can we learn from you besides Bitcoin?
So I have many, many interests, many talents. Without wanting to, make myself sound too great, but I've learned a lot of things in my life. I'm not young anymore. I'm in my mid 40s, and I've studied a wide variety of things. I've studied like formally neuroscience. I've studied linguistics. I've studied a bunch of different things. I'm actually, weirdly enough, I'm a licensed and qualified private investigator in the state of New South Wales, Australia. Um, Weird story how that happened, not for today, but yeah. So I've looked at a lot of different things, and one of the things that I always come back to is um, how do people organize themselves and why? So that's kind of my main passion, aside from Bitcoin itself. Obviously, it hugely intersects with Bitcoin, but that political idea of self organization, anarchism in general. I think that's kind of the biggest thing that I probably have to teach people outside of the Bitcoin space.
That's great. I think from that we can learn a lot, actually. Really cool. Perfect. Then we come to the end routine of the podcast where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. And we kind of touched on it a little bit, but it would be interesting to know how this will go. Do you believe that Europe countries will also start a strategic Bitcoin reserve?
Yes, but it will take a while. I think European countries in general are um, much more difficult to get anything interesting and different happening. It's one of the it's one of the disadvantages of an otherwise advantageous thing. European countries tend to have mixed member parliaments, so parliaments that are a mix of all of the different political parties that were voted for, just in different representational percentages, and that makes it really difficult for big changes to happen. That is often an advantage because you don't want big changes to happen, but it can be a disadvantage for things like this. Should if you want a country to actually be more involved in Bitcoin in Europe, that's a very difficult thing to do because you're going to have this huge argument and not enough votes and all that kind of thing inside the parliament. And perhaps a more interesting take on it, though, is do I think countries should have strategic Bitcoin reserves? And actually, I'm going to say no, I actually don't think they should, um, because I don't like countries and I want countries to disappear. I think countries are a bad idea. I think humans can organize themselves much better without having states, without having borders artificially drawn by centralized powers. So if countries have strategic Bitcoin reserves, they're going to last longer. I don't want them to. So yeah, they shouldn't do it.
I think I said it once on the podcast where it's like, it's actually more bullish that Germany sold 50,000 Bitcoin than rather than America will buy 1 million Bitcoin,
Yeah.
because I don't want America to have Bitcoin. I want to have the people to have Bitcoin.
Exactly.
So yeah, that's a great point. And people are cheering for like MicroStrategy buy more Bitcoin and for countries to buy more Bitcoin. I'm like, who do you cheer for now?
Yeah, I want people to have it, not these governments and government created entities. And I use that phrase very carefully, by the way. There, corporations exist because governments want them to exist. So a corporation is just as much a government entity as a government itself, despite the fact that on paper it's a private thing. It's not. Corporations are not private things at all. They're government things.
And it shows us kind of that people look too much at the price, because they wouldn't cheer for America to buy Bitcoin if they wouldn't look at the price, I presume.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. Yeah.
Really cool. Perfect. Then, yeah, thank you so much, Ben, for being on the show. Before I let you go, where can people find you, reach out to you, ask you questions?
Yep. So I'm on most social media just as Ben_Duval. So my first name, then underscore, and my last name. That's Telegram, Twitter. I think I'm on things like Blue Sky and so on, but I don't actually use it. But I probably have an account there. And of course, Noster. You can find me there as well. So yeah, that's where you can find me. I also I have a small consultancy company called Bitcoiner Consulting. That's bitcoinerconsulting.com. But as I mentioned earlier, I'm actually pretty much working full-time as CTO for a company called Musket right now, so I don't actually have any slots open to consult people on Bitcoin right now.
So they can reach out to you, but they don't get a slot.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Maybe
Really cool.
maybe something very small, like a 1 hour appointment to teach someone something or whatever. But yeah.
Perfect. That's great. Wait, what? Thank you so much. Exactly, that's what I wanted to point out. Your Twitter profile is, as always, linked down in the description. So every guest with every episode, there's at least one contact link. 99% of the cases, it's a Twitter link. Down in the description, you can find all the works there from Ben. Thank you so much for being on. Also, thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening, for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye-bye.